Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to Southern Gulf Islands on Fire, a webinar and community roundtable. We're just going to wait 1 or 2 minutes for the attendees to trickle in. And good afternoon. It looks like most of our attendees have joined us. My name is Jonathan Reimer. I oversee fire and emergency programs at the Capital Regional District, and I'll be your host today for the Southern Gulf Islands on Fire webinar and community roundtable. Thank you very much for joining us. We're hoping to have a fulsome conversation about wildfire on the Southern Gulf Islands, and we have about 1.5 hours to have that conversation, depending really on your folks and how many questions you guys come up with us to ask for us. One thing before we do start, just some housekeeping. Note that this webinar is being recorded and will be shared with all the participants afterwards. You'll find a link in your inbox. It's going to probably take about a week for that email to come out. But do note that when you are asking questions that this will be recorded. And to ask questions, it's not much of a conversation if it's only one way. We really do encourage all questions or comments at any time during the presentations today. Please do type your questions into that small Q&A box. You should see that probably at the bottom of your screen, depending on what device you're using. Click that Q&A button, type a question for that presenter, and then between each one of the sessions, questions will be addressed by that presenter, as well as a final round for the entire panel. So today we have a number of guests. We have 4 guest speakers for you today. We have Connor Corbett, who will be speaking on wildfire resiliency in the Southern Gulf Islands. We have Rob Severson, who will be talking on protecting homes from wildfire. And we have Jane O'Higgins-Wilson talking on evacuations. And lastly, Bridget Prochaska speaking on emergency preparedness. Your moderator today is Jolette Holland, and you'll be hearing her voice reading your questions after each session. So just before we do start today, I have a quick poll for you. We'll have 2 questions. If you could just tell us, where are you calling in from today? We have all the various islands there for your selection. If you're not calling in from one of those islands, do select other. I'll give it 1 minute here for everybody to respond. The responses are slowing. I will share the results with you, and you can see that Pender Island is well represented today with 45% of you, followed by Galliano Island, Main Island, Saturna Island, and then Piers, Sydney, or smaller islands. I know quite a diverse group, but there are a few people from there as well, and nobody who are not on the island. So that's kind of a pleasant surprise, actually. All right, one more poll, if you'll humor us for this. In your judgment, so based on what you know now, what is your wildfire risk? And you can select from a number of different levels of risk, and feel free to mark I don't know if that is true for you. All right, most people have responded. Let's look at the results. It seems like moderate is the most popular selection. About 53% of you chose moderate, followed by high, and then a few folks in both low and extreme. So a variety of responses today, and I think that gives us a good starting point for our conversation. And without further ado, I will introduce our first speaker, Connor Corbett, speaking on community wildfire resilience in the Southern Gulf Islands.
All right, thanks for that intro, Jonathan. I'm just going to get my screen going here because I have a bit of some presentation and some visuals. So thanks everyone for joining us at this webinar. Today, I'm going to sort of set the stage by talking about the Southern Gulf Islands recently completed Community Wildfire Resiliency Plan. My name is Connor Corbett. I'm a registered professional forester with a company called Diamond Head Consulting, and I led this project with the direction of Jonathan Reimer. Because our time is brief and this plan is quite a large technical document, I'm going to limit my remarks to an overview of the salient points for our discussion today, namely our wildfire risk assessment. If you have any questions, we're going to have a little break after my 10-minute presentation for questions, and then throughout the presentation, throughout the remainder of the webinar, I'll still be here and I'll chime in if I need to for anything else. And if there's anything I miss or anything offline you think of, feel free to reach out to myself or Jonathan, and we'll try and stick handle those questions. So I'll start by introducing what the Community Wildfire Resiliency Plan is. This is a large landscape level plan with the goal of building community resiliency to wildfire. It's a plan for local government. So it's for, in this case, the Capital Regional District. And it acts as a roadmap for building community wildfire resiliency in a variety of different ways. It's funded through a provincial grant, through a provincial funding program, and that grant comes with certain terms and conditions, which will become evident later in this presentation. So this is our area of interest for our Community Wildfire Resiliency Plan. So this is the Southern Gulf Islands electoral area outlined in white, and then you can see these orange bubbles, which represent the wildland-urban interface. So one of the interesting things about the Southern Gulf Islands, which is atypical for most communities, is that pretty much the whole electoral area is in the wildland-urban interface. Most communities, especially on the mainland, the wildland-urban interface is only a component of the community, but the Southern Gulf Islands is unique in that most of the area is in the wildland-urban interface. And so for our plan, we focus on the main population centers in the Southern Gulf Islands. So that's Galliano, Maine, Saturna, North and South Pender, and Piers Island off near the Sandwich Peninsula. And why is the wildland-urban interface so important for wildfire risk? Well, first of all, it's where most of the things we need to protect from wildfire are located. Where most of our homes are, it's where most of us live and play and recreate. And second, it's where natural wildland areas meet our communities. So it's where the exposure is for the most part. And finally, it's where most of our human-caused wildfires start. So fires are caused either by humans or by lightning. And in this part of the world, there's very little lightning. So most of our fires are human-caused. And those human-caused fires are going to happen where most of the humans are. And that's going to be in the wildland-urban interface. So what is wildfire risk? So when we talk about hazards and we talk about risk, what we're really talking about is what is the probability and consequence of an event. So for that doesn't matter what it is. If it's wildfire or earthquakes, it's always going to be probability versus consequence. So how do we determine what probability is for a wildfire? Well, the term that we use is wildfire threat. And the simplest way to understand that is how flammable is a forest? Can it support severe damaging wildfire? And to determine that, you have to know what is the vegetation composition in a particular area of forest? What's the terrain like? And what type of weather does it regularly experience during fire season? Because weather is a very important determinant of wildfire behavior. And again, the easy understanding is just how flammable is the forest? And to understand wildfire risk, we need to understand where those flammable forests are in relation to the things we need to protect. Because you can only have risk when those events or those hazards can threaten things that we don't want to get involved in this hazard. So that generates, by combining those two, probability and consequence, we get an assessment of wildfire risk. And we broadly categorize that as low, moderate, high, or extreme. So what that means, by way, an example is the best way to understand this. So an extreme wildfire risk area would be someplace that has regularly experiences or can regularly experience conditions that support extreme wildfires. So the forest of the Okanagan is a great example. And when those forests are right beside a populated area, like the suburbs of Kelowna, those are areas that have extreme wildfire risk. In contrast, those low wildfire risk forests are going to be really remote, really far away from our values, and they're generally not going to support vigorous wildfires. So really remote areas of the North Coast that are really wet, really far from our communities. And so this is what our wildfire risk assessment looks like for the Southern Gulf Islands. I will show another slide zoomed in on kind of the main community areas, but this is just a good high-level overview. And there's two main takeaways I'd like everyone to take from this. The first is that there's most of the area we see that's colored is yellow. So that represents a moderate wildfire risk. And I think that's the best way to simply describe the wildfire risk for the Southern Gulf Islands is moderate. There are some small areas of high, there's some other areas of low, but generally we can say that it's moderate. The second thing is that a lot of this area is grayed out. So that represents private land. So one of the terms of the grant funding that we get is that we do not assess wildfire risk on private land. The main reason for that is we just lack reliable information. And that's important in the Southern Gulf Islands and just all over Southern Vancouver Island is that there's quite a bit more private land than in most communities of BC. It's just a unique characteristic that a lot of the forested land is privately owned. And so I'll just zoom in on these local areas. And you can see, again, just lots of moderate wildfire risk in the more populated areas of Southern Gulf Islands. And the main factors that drive this moderate wildfire risk rating are twofold. The first, the Southern Gulf Islands is heavily forested, and it's heavily forested by coniferous forests, so needle-bearing trees. Coniferous forests are much more flammable than deciduous forests. However, on the coast, the type of coniferous forests we have are actually quite a bit less flammable than the types of coniferous forests we see in the interior. So the risk is somewhat mitigated by the type of coniferous fuels we have. The second factor that drives wildfire risk on the Southern Gulf Islands is that the communities are heavily forested. These are communities that are embedded in the forest. In British Columbia, most communities are actually separated from the forest. You have a developed downtown, then some suburbs, then maybe some agriculture, and then the forest. There's a bit of a spectrum. Whereas in the Southern Gulf Islands community in the forest, there's not a very sharp distinction at all, aside from a very few properties, primarily agriculture. So there's two key takeaways, I think, from this wildfire risk. The first is just fleshing out what that moderate wildfire risk means. Moderate wildfire risk means that during a regular fire season, there are going to be a couple days a year where wildfire can occur, where the weather and the fuels support wildfire. It's something to be concerned about. But the types of wildfire we expect in the Southern Gulf Islands, we're not expecting these really vigorous, massive wildfires that the BC Wildfire Service and the local fire departments can't control. We're not expecting these catastrophic Fort McMurray or Lytton or Kelowna 2003 fires. Most of the fires we expect will actually be small, not as intense as some of those catastrophic fires, and probably things that the BC Wildfire Service and local fire departments can capture in a reasonable time frame. However, because we are in communities that are embedded in the forest, that risk shouldn't be discounted because those small fires can still be very damaging. And a small fire to me is 1 hectare, 5 hectares. And on the landscape level, that is small, but if that's in your backyard, that certainly will not feel small. And when we are in a community that's this forested, those small fires can be very, very damaging. And the second point is that, as I said, private land fragments the forest landscape, and it makes it hard for us to give a complete picture of the risk environment. That being said, the difference between the public forest land and the private land in this area is not that significant. And so if your property is heavily forested, it probably has a similar forest type to the crown land, and it probably has a pretty similar wildfire risk profile. It probably is similarly a moderate wildfire risk, or even higher, just because it's going to be much closer to your home. And I know that was a pretty brief summary and probably a little bit technical, but I'm happy to turn it over for questions, and I'll be here for the rest of the presentation if anything else comes up.
Okay, there are currently no questions for you right now, Connor, but if any pop up, I will bring them up at the end of the webinar.
Sounds great. Thanks.
Thank you.
No, thank you, Connor, and thank you, Gillette. I am sure that some of this is stewing in your mind about, okay, what exactly does that moderate wildfire risk mean for you? Do you have perhaps questions on something you heard, or maybe something that you were hoping to hear but didn't? We want to hear that. Please drop that at the chat anytime. Once the first 2 people usually do it, then we'll get a small avalanche, I'm sure. Be the first. But with that, we do have several more speakers. And so at this point, I'd like to bring on Rob Severson, who is the CRD FireSmart coordinator, to talk on protecting homes during a wildfire.
Fantastic, thank you. Yes, so so far I've been to, well, all the Gulf Islands, I believe. I was just on Saturna on Wednesday, and I'm at Main Island tomorrow. So if there's anybody there who has any questions or wants to participate in shipping tomorrow at Main Island, we'll be at the fire hall. So I think all the information is probably on their website. So if you want to come by, that would be fantastic. I have a little presentation we'll do and then take some questions after. So just give me a second here. Okay. Jeez. Perfect, here we go. So this is what we're talking about, of course, is wildfire. I hope everybody can see this, but this image is from Loon Lake, which is up by Clinton, and this was 2017. So you can see in this photo, there were some houses that did survive, some that didn't. And a lot of this was because of where sprinkler protection was able to set up. And there were certain homes, I think, in this one that did do a lot of fire smarting prior to the event, and some that didn't. So what we're going to go over is, we want you to start your work in your home or your property now if you haven't already, and be ready in case any of this happens. This image here, you'll see, hopefully we don't see that big ball of fire coming, but the WUI, you can see the line of the houses, a wildland. And so I think our Southern Gulf Islands were very intermixed or right in the trees. So we need to work on this. So the role of FireSmart, I get a lot of varying opinions on what FireSmart is when I'm out and talking to people. So the biggest thing is it FireSmart gives you as homeowners the tools to better prepare your home in case of a wildfire. So my biggest recommendation would be to contact your local fire department, and that would be on any of the Gulf Islands. They will have a local FireSmart representative, and that person can come out and offer you a free assessment. And what that does is it just will help you understand where the risks are. So even if you're really up on FireSmart, I still recommend it because it gets an extra set of eyes there for you in a different perspective. And if you're going to be out working in your yard, by the time we have an assessment done, you'll have an opportunity to know maybe where to spend your time that might help you just a little bit more. So lots of tools, lots of tricks that we can help with you or help you with. There is also a rebate program, which I think is really fantastic. So if you're doing work that has been recommended by the LFR and part of your assessment, we can get you up to $500 back, which is quite a bit of money. So please ask questions about that if you have them, and we can go over that either offline or with your local FireSmart representative. And so why should you care? Well, because If there is an evacuation, you will have to leave. You can't be there while this is happening. And if your home has been fire smarted, your home will have a fantastic chance of surviving the fire. If not, it's a lot less of a chance. So prevention for wildfire season is very, very important. And a lot of that does fall on the homeowner. Here's a little survival statistics. I like this. If you do nothing, and let's say you have a cedar shake roof, which I don't know how many, I don't see a lot out there still, but there are some. If you are doing this, there's a 4% survival rate of your home. But if you have a non-combustible roof, as in a metal roof or asphalt shingle, and you've done some fire smarting, your home has a 90% chance of survival. So that says a lot right there. Plus, if you've done a lot of work, the forestry crews that are there and the structure protection crews will spend a lot of time on that property. If you haven't done any fire smart work, it becomes very unsafe for the fire departments to put their firefighters in front of that wall of flame coming, because there's chances of ignition all around it. And so they will not spend as much time on that home as they would on a home that has been properly fire smarted. So those are just a few things to remember. Now we're going to watch a little video here. Just explains the different zones and what you can do as far as fire smarting your home.
As we continue to extend our lifestyles and communities into the forested and grassland areas of the country, we become more exposed to the danger of wildfire. Living where wildfires can occur puts our homes at risk, but it is possible to live safely and resiliently with wildfire. Fire Smart principles are designed to mitigate a home's vulnerability by taking proactive action on our properties to reduce wildfire risks. Homes ignite due to the condition of the home and everything that surrounds it out to 100 meters from the foundation. This is called the home ignition zone. Let's check in with the residents of Aspen Street in the community of Little Blue to see the proactive steps they're taking within their Fire Smart home ignition zone.
Hi, I'm Levi. I've lived in this house for over 25 years. Wildfire seasons are starting earlier, lasting longer, and are more intense. We need to take action. Residents in the community next to us were evacuated last week and suffered devastating loss. We need to take ownership of our part in the overlapping home ignition zones in our neighborhood, starting with the most critical zone, the non-combustible zone, which should be a minimum 1.5 meter non-combustible surface around your entire home. I've cleared the vegetation and combustible material around my house down to bare mineral soil, including combustible debris from under my deck.
Hi, I'm Sandy. Priority Zone 1 is between 1.5 and 10 meters from your home. To create a landscape that will not easily allow fire to reach our homes, my husband and I moved our renovation materials out to Priority Zone 2, breaking them into small organized piles. Firewood piles have been moved to Priority Zone 2 and patio furniture into the shed. We also plan to incorporate some fire-resistant landscaping products into our yard.
Howdy, my name is Colin. I've been working in Priority Zone 2, 10 to 30 meters from your home. The trees of the vast forested landscape that our homes back onto need to be pruned to 2 meters to prevent fire from climbing the trees. Keeping fire on the ground will make it much easier for firefighters to manage.
Hi, I'm Alex. I've been busy in Priority Zone 3, which is 30 to 100 meters from my home. To create a fire break, we've hired a professional arborist to come in and thin out the thick spruce trees we have in Zone 3. I'm also going to prune the remaining spruce trees up to 2 meters and clear the dead and down woody debris. In subdivisions like Aspen Street, priority zones can overlap. It is important to talk to your neighbors and identify ways that you can work together.
We've all taken one small action on our properties, but we need to do more, and we need to do it together. I say we contact our local fire department and see what else we can do.
Agreed.
All right, good one. So that one just went over the zones. There's one more here, and this is well, I'll let you watch this. I like this because it shows how effective building with FireSmart can be.
My name's Greg Stratton. I'm a builder in the Squamish area. We're at Glacier Valley Farms up the Squamish Valley. The whole property is 42 acres. Well, this would be our home that we've just finished doing a bit of a renovation on that was impacted by the fire. So I was actually trying to get back to the house with some pumps to hopefully drop in our pond and do some more fire protection around it. And they stopped me at the bridge, and I was told by the gentleman there, I had described to him where I lived, and it was 300 meters up the road on the left, and he just looked at me and said, "Your house is gone." I found his description of saying the house is gone to be a little bit surprising, because I had chosen the materials that we'd chosen, and I didn't think there was anything that was close enough to actually catch the house on fire, but I was doubting at that point in time. Well, the fire itself began early in the afternoon, and we had a neighbor call and tell us that there was a fire up the valley, but not to be too concerned, but just something to be aware of. And over the course of a couple of hours, it went from being a very relaxed situation to extremely chaotic. The fire was right next to our property, and everybody was running around trying to save our animals and set them free and put 2 goats in a car. Got chaotic very quickly. Property line burned right up to there, but since we'd been cleaning the edges of our property and it was fairly green at that point in time, didn't really come onto the property. But then an ember from the fire flew up and landed on our carport over here and lit the carport roof on fire. And the heat was intense off of the structure that was burning. The helicopters were coming right as that building became engulfed, so they were able to kind of keep the area cool a bit. But basically our vinyl windows melted and our exterior pane of glass blew out. Didn't do a ton of damage to the building because of the products we used. We're extremely happy we took this FireSmart approach to construction and the renovation of our house, because it's obviously proved to be extremely important and saved the building. We recognize that if we hadn't done that, the house wouldn't be here any longer. So we used the hardy board siding and a metal roof, and the combination, I've always been told, and since I began in the industry, is a great combination for interface fires, and now I have the proof. I'm confident that our home would not be here today if we hadn't built in the FireSmart method. Good advanced planning is absolutely crucial, because if the fire starts to come, you have no opportunity to do that work afterwards. So if you want to learn more, go to firesmartbc.ca. Start now, take action, it'll be worth it.
Good one. So what I would just recommend to people, this program does work. It's been, I think, proven throughout the interior, especially where the wildfires are a little more frequent. So if you have any questions about it, again, go to your local fire department's website. They should or will have something to do with FireSmart on there. And if not, the CRD FireSmart website will have my contact info on there. And that is firesmart@crd.bc.ca. And that way we can set up an assessment. Again, it's free to you to get it done. And it will just give you some, I think, some really good direction on what you can do to make your home a little safer in case of a wildfire. So I'll just turn it over now to anybody if they have any questions.
I don't
Gillette.
I don't see any questions popping up yet for you, Rob, but there are a number of questions that are related to Connor's presentation. So Jonathan, should I go ahead and read those now?
Yeah, let's do that. Instead of it sitting there for a while.
Okay.
We'll bring you back, Connor.
All right. So the first question asks, can you use the IT reports, Madrone and Cabin, to estimate wildfire risk?
So we did. Sorry, did I cut you off, Gillette?
Pardon me?
Okay, sorry. We did review those reports as part of our research for this project. They were very, very helpful. The only challenge is that the wildfire risk methodology they use is an older one. And part of the new grant funding is there's an updated methodology, which is quite different. It kind of takes you to the same place. It just takes a different way there, but To sum it up, yeah, we did review them. They're really helpful. They're great reports, and they provided a lot of context that was really helpful.
Okay, thanks, Connor.
And maybe I'll jump in just to leave that one there. It is really awkward to be putting up these maps about risk, and most of them are great. That is not our preference. And I just want to foreshadow that I am working on a project, hopefully available quite shortly, that would give you that full property ownership view of risk that you're hoping to get here. I don't have it available today, but very shortly, I'll be putting that up on our website.
Okay, ready for the next question? What should
Yep.
be done? What should be done in forests where there has been a lot of cedar dieback? We've had a number of large trees blow down this past winter.
Yeah, so that's an issue all over the drier parts of the South Coast, all over the coastal Douglas fir ecosystem. I work in a bunch of different communities where we are really noticing that, and it's a tricky problem because on the landscape level, it's not that widespread. I would say it's not a huge problem at the landscape scale, but where it's bad, where there is a lot of cedar dieback, there is quite a bit, and so it is quite a problem at the local scale. It's difficult to manage that problem without causing more problems, or it's difficult to strike a balance, because ideally we would like to get that fuel out of the forest. But when you're dealing with some forests where a majority of the trees are dead or dying, it's tough to remove that fuel while also not overly impacting the other important values that are remaining. Removing those huge volumes of fuel requires machinery, or it requires burning on site. And those are things that are hard to do while balancing the other values that are there. So I'm not trying to dance around the question, but what I'm trying to say is that it's not a simple, there's not like a one size fits all. I think you have to take a site specific look at each of these forests that are experiencing this problem and try and find solutions at that site level.
Okay, thank you, Connor. The next question is, have soil studies and consideration of tree species dieback been included in these studies to account for possible increase in fire? And then in addition to her question, just to give some context to it, she says, my question has to do with the increase in cedar dieback, soil erosion from harsher rains during the winters, resulting in more at-risk trees, compiled with the increase in drought months. So if you need me to read the question again, Connor, let me know.
Yeah, I think I understand kind of the big picture. That's a really difficult question. And I think a lot of people are in my world are struggling with, what do we do about this problem? I think erosion is kind of scary in this context. I think the good news is that wildfires in this area we don't see conditions where we have these really, really deep burning fires that really create erosion problems. And so it's, in terms of like post wildfire erosion, we're not overly concerned about that. But speaking specifically to your question, I don't have a good answer for you. I think that's something that we're all kind of wrestling with and unsure of what's going to happen. It's a great question. If you find a good answer, let me know.
Well, maybe I can pull something out of there that I'd be interested in hearing about. It seems like there's kind of a forest health aspect there, where we're talking about forest insects and disease, possibly compounded by drought and so on. Was that something that you happened to notice during your surveys in the Southern Gulf Islands?
Yeah, absolutely. There's definitely forests, particularly drier sites. So these might be sites with thinner soils, thinner rocky soils, maybe really well drained and less likely to hold moisture. You definitely notice the cedars are struggling. And I would say there wasn't many forests aside from like the wettest lowland sites where we saw the cedars thriving. I would say you can really see the effects of the droughts we've had. And cedars are interesting because they show the effects a couple of years after the fact, after the drought. it's the following season or 2 years where you really start to see it. I would say that the dieback in the cedars was the most noticeable forest health concern we saw throughout the Southern Gulf Islands. And we do talk about it in the report.
Thanks, Connor.
Great. Okay, so on to the next question. What are the statistics around fires started by visitors versus residents? I'm wondering how fire risk is communicated to visitors to the islands. Could there be information videos on the ferries? And then another participant just commented to say there has been fire smart messaging in the BC ferries onboard announcements in summer months in the past.
Yeah, so the first question is, we don't track who caused the fires, and the BC Wildfire Service is really good at tracking wildfires, but their only information they give you is, was it human or lightning? They don't say who caused it, if it was a visitor or a resident. And the second question, the second component of that is there is quite a few recommendations for communication in our wildfire resiliency plans. Education and communication are super important. I'd say they're probably most of our recommendations and are revolve around education. So we do have a whole host of suggestions. I think there are some really good things happening throughout the islands. There actually is quite good signage. I think it could be improved. There's always ways to improve, but I think there's a good starting point, I think is a good way to put it. And then there's options for enhancing it throughout the Southern Gulf Islands. And I don't know if that was all the questions. That I answered all of these?
Yeah, I think that you addressed all the points in her question. There are a couple more questions. So the next one says the excessive accumulation of dead and down debris at the Lighthouse Park / Main has not been addressed for a number of years. I wonder if there's some sort of fire smart plan for this federal park.
I'll throw that one over to you, Jay.
Yeah, thanks. Hi, it's Jay Zach Lurzny, Fire Management Officer for Southern Gulf Islands. So regarding Maine, my plan is, I haven't been there recently, but I will be heading over there the next few weeks. I'm looking at it from a danger tree perspective, but that'll allow me to sort of look at what the current fuel loading is there. But currently it's not identified as a high priority from our internal sort of risk assessment. And so that's just looking at the the risk at various parts in the park reserve and where we can kind of make the biggest difference for the most effective use of sort of limited resources and capacity. So if there's any if there's any update or change there, to my knowledge though, I don't it's not currently something that's of high concern on my radar, but like I said, I'll be out there shortly and reassess that based on your comments. Thank you.
Great, thank you. And there's one last question. I'm familiar with fire smart approaches. In the Islands Trust area, there's some resistance to cutting down trees and clearing ground fuels. Recently on Salt Spring, a summary of a panel discussion promoted features such as assembled nurse logs, which leaves piles of logs and debris apparently to promote ecosystems. It's confusing. Do you have any thoughts?
Yeah, absolutely. And it is confusing. It is tricky. And I think the best way to think about it is that not all ground fuels are equal. So not all ground fuels are a problem. It all depends on how much there are and how they're arranged. That's how we like to think about different fuels in the forest. So an example of bad ground fuels is if around your property you just have a blanket of twigs and tree needles and bark mulch that's really, really deep, and it's just completely continuous over the surface of the forest floor. That's a problem. That's not something we want to see. However, having sparse logs and coarse woody debris that's discontinuous and spread out, that's not necessarily a bad thing depending on where it's located. I think within 10 meters of our house, we really don't want to see very much combustible material whatsoever. But out from there, I think having piles or some small amounts of coarse woody debris is totally fine. I think in that particular circumstance, what they might be saying is that it's better to have, in my opinion, a small pile of coarse woody debris than it is to have that same woody debris spread out and continuous over the forest floor, where it can spread a fire throughout the forest floor. If it's a small pile surrounded by a really cleaned out area, I think that's not necessarily a bad thing. And I think that does provide some really important habitat for critters and little plants and things like that.
Mhm. Okay, great. Thank you, Connor. And there's one last question. It's a bit of a concern. The participant says, broom is very flammable. Can the public lands be better maintained without expecting concerned volunteer groups to take that responsibility on?
Yeah, this is a question we get a lot. Broom is quite flammable, and it is an invasive species. It's a problem. It takes over sites. It's really difficult to manage. There's no really, as far as I know, I haven't seen any really great solutions. I think the good work that volunteer groups are doing should be applauded, but like I think this question is alluding to, it's not super scalable. I think, again, like one of the previous questions, it's a very site-specific answer to managing broom. I think it's hard for us to give like a one-size-fits-all answer to what's best to do. I think it would have to be kind of site planning sort of scale. I don't know if you have anything to add to that, Jonathan.
Not really. I can't speak to the specifics of, you're probably alluding to there's various levels of protected areas, large protected areas across the islands. Some are municipal or local government, and there's some provincial, and there's some federal, and then it's even within that, there's various gradations. And some places are, I think, doing a pretty good job of managing their sites. Other sites are more or less what you could call natural, even though that broom is not the natural state of those forests. And I can't speak to all of them, but I think we are certainly concerned with the fire risk that broom presents, and where possible, oftentimes they do rely on volunteers because of the cost associated with treating those sites. Where there's other options, certainly from the CRD's perspective, we would love to see that treatment happen.
Okay.
I don't know if that was a good answer, but I think we're probably at the end of those questions, Jolette, if I hear that. Is that true?
Yeah, well, one more just popped up.
Okay.
Okay. If you have a shaded mossy site and you remove trees and vegetation, does it dry out the ground and increase the fire risk?
That's a great question. And that's a really important question. I think in the coast, in this area where we do have summer droughts where sites can dry out, I think there's no one size fits all. Again, sorry, I can't give you like a really simple answer to that. But if I'm working on a fuel management prescription in this part of the world, like I have many times, and I'm providing guidelines and recommendations to a client on what to do to reduce the flammability of a forest, always in the back of my mind is how do we do this in such a way that we're retaining soil moisture and we're keeping shade to maintain the moisture at the forest floor. That's critical because some of these sites are really prone to drying out if you open them up too much. And by open them up, I mean removing overstory trees. So the goal is almost always going to be dealing with the understory, but maintaining a canopy layer that's shading out to retain all that soil moisture. And I think that's one of the most important considerations we have on almost all our sites where we're doing large scale fuel management.
Thank you, Connor. And that's all the questions for now.
Good.
Great, thanks.
Yep.
Well, keep popping those questions in there. I really appreciate Connor, you did a lot of the heavy lifting on that one. I'm really excited for our next presentation. I always there to learn a lot. We're going to bring in Jane O'Higgins-Wilson, and she's going to be speaking to us on evacuations, what we can expect during one of those, if they do occur.
Thank you, Jonathan. Okay, so I can look over my shoulder and see that everyone can now see my screen. So I'm going to be covering evacuation basics with you. So in this section, I'm going to cover an overview of evacuation behavior, review the language and process of evacuation, and talk about preparing for evacuation. I'd like to give you some context as I talk about how people behave during evacuations. I've been evacuated twice as I was on Haida Gwaii during the 2012 and 2013 earthquakes and tsunami evacuations, and neither time did I act the way that I thought that I would act. Before those events, I would have assumed that warning the public would be simply a matter of informing them that they are in danger and waiting for them to take the appropriate action. So you sound the alarm, people get the message, and they evacuate. In fact, people will do a variety of things. They argue with their spouse, they go online, they do some research, they go back to sleep, or if you're me, you call your mother, which turns out to not be a great crisis management tool. This not only causes delays in evacuation, but also means some people never evacuate at all. It turns out this isn't unusual. People are complicated, and the way we make decisions is complicated, particularly when we're under stress. Some very smart people have studied why this happens. This is Lindell and Perry's model outlining the decision-making process. And the shorthand is this: for a person to evacuate or take any protective action, they need to receive the message that there's danger, they need to feel personally at risk, and they need to understand what they're supposed to do. There's also a number of situational reasons why someone might not evacuate, which is where household pre-planning can also be very, very useful. So research has shown that there's things we can do to communicate the evacuation information in a way that's more helpful. First, we can make sure that the message is coming from a trusted source and demonstrate that the messenger can be trusted. We can provide clear messages and ensure that messaging is consistent across the different media. And we can have two-way communication before an event occurs, which is what we're trying to do right now. So now I'm going to talk about evacuation language, because being clear and precise about the language we use can make that decision-making easier. So an evacuation alert means that something is possible and you may need to evacuate, and so you need to be prepared. An evacuation order means you are at risk, leave the area immediately. A rescind means this is clear, you can return home now. And shelter in place means stay where you are and wait for instructions from authorities. Another couple terms you will hear are reception centers and assembly areas. A reception center is a hub where volunteers provide assistance to evacuees, and an assembly area is a designated safe location to wait to get more information. The final two terms are a SOL and a tactical evacuation. A SOL is a state of local emergency, and it's a legal term. It's a process by which a local authority, which is the CRD, is allowed to use extraordinary emergency powers, such as requiring an evacuation. A tactical evacuation is done when an immediate evacuation is required and there isn't time for a SOL to be issued and the responders have to evacuate immediately. So the process on paper looks like this. The hazard occurs and the evacuation alert is issued so the public knows they should prepare. The hazard escalates, a SOL is issued, followed quickly by an evacuation order. The area is evacuated, the hazard situation improves, and the order is rescinded and everyone returns home. However, this also happens. An event happens, there's a tactical evacuation, and the paperwork is done afterwards. So what are we doing and what can you do to prepare? Well, the CRD's created evacuation guides specific to the electoral areas. The guide is short and sweet. It has a map of each area with possible reception centers and assembly areas. It has contact information for the area's emergency program and where to sign up for your area-specific emergency alerts. It covers knowing the risks in your area and the basics of understanding evacuation messaging. It also has a fillable household emergency plan. And the last page is a checklist of the things that you need to check off as you leave your house to evacuate. So this is the SGI guides. There's one for Maine, one for Saturna, Pender, and one for Galliano. The guides are available in hard copy from your local emergency program, or the digital version is in a link that we'll be adding to the chat. So a final comment on preparedness, the province has supplied an online evacuation assistance tool and CRD volunteers are training on it. So if you can't make it to a reception center and need help, we will still be able to help you. If you want to be proactive and get ahead of the game, make sure you have the BC Services Card app on your devices. It makes using the ERA tool easier, and you can pre-register on ERA if you need to. The app is free on the Apple App Store and Google Play. Okay, thanks for taking the time to listen today. Hopefully you never have to evacuate, but you will have some of the right information to make decisions that you need to make if it actually does happen.
Thank you, Jane. That was great. Do we have any questions for Jane on evacuations?
Not yet. Jane is so thorough and concise that there are no questions at the moment. I'll let you know if any pop up.
Okay. I do notice that we have people raising their hands. I didn't actually know you could do that, so well done on figuring that out. I have no way to call on you, unfortunately. So unfortunately, the only way that we can interact with you in the system that we have here is for you to pop that information into the Q&A, and then we answer live. So if do feel free to do that at any time, and we will answer every question that we have time for. So please do. With that, I'm going to bring up our final presenter for the day. Please join us, Bridget Prochaska. She is your emergency program coordinator. So you're the lead for all things emergency program on the Southern Gulf Islands, and she's here to talk about the emergency preparedness.
Thanks, Jonathan, very much. Jane is going to be my operator for my PowerPoint. So there it is. Thank you very much. I did want to thank everybody for taking the time to join today. I appreciate it's in the middle of the afternoon. It's not always an easy time for people to make time for presentations like this. Unfortunately, it is being recorded, so we'll make sure that others can get their hands on this important information. As Jonathan mentioned, I am the Emergency Program Coordinator for the Southern Gulf Islands, and I am well supported by island community coordinators. We have them on Galliano, Maine, Pender, Saturna, Piers, and Sydney Island, and they all help me in trying to bring forward a good emergency preparedness messaging, as that is such a vital, a vital part of your safety and your well-being. So why prepare? I mean, to some degree, I guess it's quite obvious why we should be preparing. The bottom line is you have a much better chance of coping with an emergency or a disaster, and you'll also recover more quickly when that emergency has passed. By being prepared, you'll be able to make better, more confident decisions and be less motivated by fear. Knowledge and preparedness equals resilience. So preparedness is a responsibility that we all share together, but you and your family are the foundation on which community preparedness and resilience is built. It does start with you. So let's all prepare to protect ourselves, our lives, our health, our infrastructure, the environment around us, and even our finances. It's very important to recognize that being prepared and knowing what to do in a disaster can really mitigate the impact of that disaster. And also, very importantly, it can lessen the burden on first responders like the fire department, RCMP, and others who are going to be out there trying to help people and keep them safe. So it starts with these 3 simple tips. Know the risks, make a plan, get a kit. And we're going to spend a little bit more time looking at those in a moment. There are many risks that we can face. In fact, there are over 50 types of hazards that can impact us. The top 10 hazards outlined by Prepared BC are the ones shown on this slide. In the Southern Gulf Islands, we've identified our top 3 hazards to be wildfires, severe winter storms with extended power outages, and earthquakes. So understanding the types of risks that we could face here will help us to create an emergency plan, which in turn helps build resilience. We start by making a plan. When we make this plan, we are planning for ourselves, for our families, for people who may have disabilities, that may be seniors. Planning for your pets is very important. In an evacuation, many people will not leave home without their pets. And if they have not made some accommodation to take them with, it can cause lots of problems. You want to plan for your neighborhood. If you have a business, you want to plan for that. You want to plan to evacuate, as Jane was talking about earlier. And you, opposite to that, you want to be planning to stay at home, potentially for several weeks. So you need to take a few minutes to draft a plan. You want to keep copies of those plans in your kits, and you need to update and exercise them at least once a year. There are lots of planning templates available out there. They're available through the CRD website, and the province of BC also has excellent templates. Next, you want to build your kits. Consider what kits you're going to need and where. Let's start talking about sheltering in place. Here we recommend at least a 2-week supply of food, water, a heat source if there is not going to be any power available to us, medications, and the like, because when you're being asked to shelter at home, that means not going to the store or not being able to go to the store. So you want everything that you need available at home. If you're told to evacuate immediately in the case of wildfire or perhaps a hazardous material spill, you'll want to have something called a grab and go kit that's readily available. You don't want to have to start wondering where you put it. And you want to have 1 kit per family member. That kit can be personalized, but it should include things like non-perishable food, drinking water, first aid kit, seasonal clothing, personal waste items, cell phone charger, medications if you're on them, some cash and small bills, N95 mask, and so on and so on. Again, complete lists available online to help you build and personalize your grab and go kits. And make sure when you're creating these kits to think about your pets, what their needs are going to be, and so that you've got their supplies ready as well. Another important aspect to preparedness is knowing your neighbors. There are neighborhood programs on your island, so you might want to make inquiries about the program and who your neighborhood contacts are. You might want to consider hosting a neighborhood gathering and certainly supporting your neighbors who do put on events like a potluck or perhaps even a Fire Smart event to get to know your neighbors better. You want to know who your vulnerable neighbors are so that if there's a need to evacuate, you can perhaps assist with that process if they live on their own, or if they have other needs, say perhaps it's a very hot stretch of weather where you can do a wellness check on your neighbors to make sure that everybody in your neighborhood is going to be okay. And also knowing assembly areas and evacuation routes, which these new guides, evacuation guides from the CRD do outline, is another important tool to have in your kit. There is a quote from the former mayor of Christchurch, who, as you may know, Christchurch in New Zealand suffered multiple severe earthquakes a number of years ago. And she had this to say, that if the earthquakes taught us one thing, it is that there is strength in our communities coming together to take charge of their destiny. The power of neighborhood strength. As Jane alluded to, it's very important to get information from a trusted source. And in this age of social media, many people are tempted to go online to their community Facebook pages to see if they can find out what's going on. It is important that as part of your pre-planning, you pre-identify where you're going to get official, trusted sources of information. You will only want to take direction from first responder agencies such as the fire department, RCMP, the CRD, which is your local government, your emergency program, and traditional media outlets. I will focus on this piece. Many of you, I'm sure, have heard about the public alert notification system. PANS is the acronym. We are very much in support of our residents and visitors signing up for this free service. That's the website link right there, crd.bc.ca/PANS. It's free, and you will find it one of the fastest ways to get notified about emergency information in your area. So if you are not registered, I highly encourage you to register right away. And that is it for me. Obviously, there's lots more to talk about when it comes to emergency preparedness, but I appreciate the opportunity to give you this very quick overview. The Southern Gulf Islands Emergency Program is here to help you at any time if you have questions. And once again, remember that preparedness and resilience starts with you. Thanks.
And thank you very much, Bridget. Do we have any questions for Bridget?
There are no questions yet for Bridget, but a few have popped up based on Jane's presentation.
Excellent.
So I can read those now if you like. It looks like some of the participants of the webinar have been taking a look into the evacuation guides. So the first comment is, I think it's a useful tool for new residents to know where the evacuation sites and reception centers are. However, what I don't see in that booklet is what happens next. As a longtime resident, getting to the water to escape a wildfire is intuitive, but what is not intuitive is who is picking me up from the beach. Can somebody tell me how that unfolds?
I think that that's going to be one of those questions that, yes, I wish I could tell you exactly who would be picking you up in that circumstance, but because the hazards are there's so much of unknown in that what you've just described, that we certainly are in there's discussions that have gone on with BC Ferries. The emergency program has coordinated with BC Ferries about how they would assist. We've coordinated with other responder agencies. So it would be definitely dependent on that particular event in that situation.
Okay, thank you, Jane. The next question is, who decided on the assembly areas and reception centers for the Pender Island Guide, as it is missing an assembly area and reception center for South Pender Island?
And this is perhaps something you could speak to a little bit, Bridget, as you're very familiar with South Pender. But I remember some discussions about what it takes for us to list something on this guide. And I know we had a lot of qualifications of, we want to be able to fit a certain amount of people. We want this to be a public space that they can access more or less 24/7, that it should be outside of various hazard zones. Did that inform our decision there, Bridget? Do you remember?
Yes, we certainly did have some discussion about South Pender, and what you see there on the map are certainly some of our designated assembly areas and reception centers, but not necessarily all. And this speaks to what Jane was just saying, which is so much of the information and direction that people will receive in an emergency is based on the hazard itself. On the wildfire, for example, where is the fire? What direction is it moving in? How large is it? How accessible is it? There are a lot of things that are going to impact where the assembly point is decided on and where the reception center is decided on. Obviously, you don't want to tell people to go to a reception center that is in the path of the fire. So for the purposes of the guide, it was felt that since there is no public building that is really large enough to house a significant number of people on South Pender, and we really only have the community room, it was felt that it was much safer for people to evacuate to North Pender. and that it would be much easier to manage them because we had better facilities there.
Well said, Bridget. And you know, I'll only add that, yeah, you know, just to reiterate what Bridget says, that it's not that we are abandoning you on South Pender as an emergency program in the event of something that compromises your ability to move to North Pender. It's just that we are not prepared to say that the XYZ is going to be your approach, because we have quite broad powers under the Emergency Program Act, and we have the power to commandeer private property and to do fairly large and expensive things. But I think it would be probably a little bit ahead of the game to try and say, hey, we're going to commandeer this particular person's private property or this particular commercial enterprise's private property and use it in this way. Even though we will, you know, use those resources when the time comes during an emergency.
Great, thank you, Jonathan. There's one more question. I like what's said about being prepared to shelter in place for several weeks. I wonder, however, if the messaging shouldn't be to be prepared for a much longer period of time. And the participant then quotes an article from the New Yorker magazine about how it could take months and months and even up to a year or more to restore some services like electricity, water, sewer, highways, and healthcare facilities. So yeah, the question is, should we be promoting messages for longer term preparation?
Jonathan, you want to take that one, or do you want me to speak to it?
I would actually be happy to speak to that.
Please.
You know, I think ideally being prepared for longer is better, but when we start talking about preparing for, you know, 6 months to a year, you do start talking about where you're getting close to the idea of people stockpiling goods, which we don't necessarily want to encourage. We saw how some of that played out in COVID and that it wasn't positive. I think that that supply chain disruption, which is really what your concern is, that will become a federal issue. So, and if you've seen where these things have fallen apart in the past, and I think we saw a bit of this during the Atmospheric River event, where we did have a supply chain, that we did see sort of some of the impacts that we would see, that there will be ways to get goods in towards people. The other point I'd like to make is, because I was on Haida Gwaii during the big earthquakes, you on the islands are probably well served for your locations for those events. 2-story wood frame buildings do very well in earthquakes. People who have things like their own wells, who are used to having power outages, so have wood stoves, you actually are probably going to be well prepared compared to city dwellers. That's a personal opinion, but.
No, I think that's fair.
So, and I would just add to that, because, you know, when you look at some of the messaging that's out there from the province, for example, and other municipalities, where they're still only making the recommendation to be prepared for 3 days. And we feel that that is insufficient. And we, last year, I believe, we looked at expanding that to a week, and now we're saying 2 weeks. But we also need to be realistic that, you know, we don't want people to feel that it's an impossible task to have that level of preparedness. So really, those are our recommendations. I think whatever people can do, and they know best what they need to stay comfortable for that period of time.
Right. So the participant just says, then my well doesn't work during power outages. It requires an electric pump. So what are they to do in that type of a situation?
Well, that becomes part of your emergency plan. You know, you have to recognize that this could be a problem for you in a power outage, and start to look at what are your options in a power failure, and be prepared for that, whether it's stocking, you know, a sufficient numbers of bottles of water, or looking at filtered water. There are a number of ways that one can manage that situation, and we're happy to talk through that with you. If you want to reach out to the emergency program, I can give you that email address again, and happy to help you solve that problem.
Great, thanks, Bridget. There's a comment about the evacuation guides, just the participant wants to say, if you ever do a reprint, I would recommend you add a comment that the reception center and assembly areas depend on the location of the emergency.
100% agree with that. We definitely discussed the wording so much because you're right. It is so dependent. And so you notice when we have the list, it's possible because we knew we didn't want to tell you for sure this is where the location is, because we know that we can't tell you that for sure that's where the location is.
Right. Okay, that's about all the questions for the evacuations and the preparedness. There's another question. It's probably more related to Connor's presentation. So Jonathan, I'm not sure if you want to do like a wrap up of questions now or.
Yeah, so we have about 10 minutes more where we can take questions, and we are here. We want to talk with you about fire, about emergency preparedness. So please, this is your last chance. Throw your questions into the chat. We will address as many as we can in those 10 minutes. And so let's start with opening this up to the panel, and we'll take that first question for Connor.
Okay, so the question is, have you assessed the potential role of fire breaks on the islands, particularly for private forested acreages? Is there material available on their construction and usefulness?
Yeah, that's a really good question. There's kind of two parts to it. The first is, when do we consider landscape level fuel breaks? So these are really effective ways at reducing the likelihood of a landscape level fire moving into a community. But our risk analysis shows that that's pretty unlikely. I think most of the fires that are going to happen in the Southern Gulf Islands are going to be local fires that start really close to homes, rather than, I think the scenario that you could think of is maybe a fire on the mainland spitting out, or the main part of Vancouver Island spitting out a huge ember shower. But like an actual flame front isn't going to travel into our community from an adjacent community. In most community wildfire resiliency plans in the interior, where I also do work on these projects, these communities might be, I'm working on one right now where we're looking at a landscape level fuel break, and west of the community is 700 kilometers of continuous forest. That's the scenario where we need a landscape level fuel break. That's a prime example of when we do these. I think within the Southern Gulf Islands, the benefits of a landscape level fuel break, so maybe cutting a Galliano Island in half with a fuel break, the benefits of that are pretty marginal, I would think, especially when you consider the amount of work that would be involved. The second part is that our plan is really focused on what local government can do. And local government is not really going to be, it's not really appropriate for local government to be leading projects of this magnitude on private land. But there are resources, and Jonathan and the Capital Regional District, if that's something you're interested in, would be happy to talk to you and point you in the right direction. There's a ton of different options for fuel breaks. They look at there's a lot of different ways that it can work. Again, I feel like I'm becoming a broken record, but it all depends on the site. Like what's appropriate as a fuel break really depends on what the existing conditions are, and what recommendations to create that fuel break are will depend on what's already there.
Great. Thank you, Connor. Another question says, on Salt Spring, there was a recent fire risk reduction workshop report submitted by Transition Salt Spring. It was suggested that this report should apply to the Southern Gulf Islands as well. How does this report overlap with the CRD Community Wildfire Resiliency Plan?
Maybe I can speak to that quickly. That was an excellent workshop that was put on by this group called Transition Salt Spring, mostly focused on management of wildfire risk on private lands, but there was a broad lens there. I know myself, Connor, Jay, a number of others presented at that workshop, and there was some good takeaways. I'm kind of trying to figure out what is the piece that she is wondering might apply to the other islands. In general, I think the risk analysis and the options were well captured there. A lot of them are about the large managed private lands. There isn't a lot of government programs to support them in the way that we can support homeowners. So with homeowners, you've heard about the rebates, you've heard about the assessments, you've heard about the chipping days. Well, how does that scale up when you now own hundreds of hectares? I don't have a great answer for you, so please don't answer that question or ask that question. But in terms of generally that report applying here, I think it certainly would.
Great, thank you, Connor and Jonathan. Another question, how do we prepare visitors to our islands to respond to emergencies or evacuations?
Bridget, do you want to address what you do currently with visitors and maybe any ideas you have for scaling that up?
It is an excellent question. We do, especially in the summer months, get quite a number of visitors, as does Salt Spring. And it is a more difficult question because they aren't plugging into the usual community information streams that residents have. We have given some thought to it, but when people buy property in the islands, we do include preparedness information, emergency program information in the welcome pamphlets that people get when they become new homeowners here. But we haven't actually spent as much time as perhaps we should on visitors to our islands. So I appreciate the question, and I think we'll be giving that some further consideration.
Thanks, Bridget. There's a few more questions. Do we still have time, Jonathan?
Yeah, let's do another 5 minutes.
Okay. Water collection is a resource that many use. At the end of the summer, some may be running low and unable to fight a local fire, and others may have plenty. Would the CRD consider a program to assist in a method to redistribute collected water, to refill people's water collection tanks with non-potable water?
Well, there's a couple aspects of that question. I'll see if I can tease it apart and still say something that is helpful. Like everything on Southern Gulf Islands, it's really of the place and it's distributed, and it's different in different places. So as you know, even your local government is distributed. You know, part of that Islands Trust does, and part of that Capital Regional District does. Like we do Fire Smart and the emergency program. But you have a lot of fire departments that are run by improvement districts and societies and a whole spectrum of folks with different interests. And that also applies to your water, where I think there are dozens, if not, perhaps 100 different small water purveyors across the island. And each one of those has their own set of emergency plans for drought, for what are they going to do if the water gets low. How are they going to either work with their neighbors or share water or truck in water? And so I'm a little bit hesitant to wade into that without knowing exactly what each one of their plans are. But what I do know is that as the emergency program, we're a partner for those folks in the same way that we're a partner for BC Ferries, and we're a partner for your fire departments and Coast Guard and all these people who are doing good work out there. And so if that was to be useful for us to say, hey, we can step into this space, offer a service where we're redistributing water. It sounds like the idea is to take water from one area and then give it to another. That would certainly be a space we would be happy to fill. That's a bit of a non-answer now, but if you want to follow up with me personally on that exact question, just send me an email and I'll give you a call.
Great. Thanks, Jonathan. Another participant asks, does the CRD partner with Islands Trust and the Conservancy for fire mitigation in terms of policy and public messaging?
I have to guess what conservancy. It might be NCC or it might be the Galliano Conservancy. There's a few around the islands there. Again, I think I'm going to be quite blunt here, where the answer is not enough. We do not partner as much as we should be. I know this community wildfire resiliency plan has kicked off a level of conversation between the Islands Trust, the CRD, and some of the other folks that I think is long overdue. That said, there's been a ton of good work that has been out there. I want to give a shout out to say that the Pender Fire Society and others who have been pounding this ground for many years and in some cases decades. But in terms of like an intergovernmental panel of like cooperative actions, that does not exist right now. And honestly, I think it needs to.
Okay, thank you, Jonathan. There aren't any other questions at this time, but there is a comment. I like this format. I would appreciate more of these community information sessions on other topics as well.
That is great to hear. Thank you very much. And if that is the last comment, I'm just going to bring up, oh, my PowerPoint's not up.
Jonathan, can I just make one more brief interjection here? Jane wanted to make a follow-up comment about the evacuation guides.
Please do.
Thanks, Gillette. I just wanted to say to the person who pointed out that we should be saying that those are potential spots and not definite spots on the maps. I just checked the guides and you're correct. We're actually inconsistent. We intended to say that they were all potential, but we did not. Saturna says that they are potential, but other ones don't. So we are going to make sure that that gets corrected. So they all say that. So thank you for pointing it out.
Well, thank you. That's why we have these things to edit our own work. But no, thank you very much. This was really useful for me as well. There's a lot of things that we said on a lot of different topics today, but I think if I were to boil down what I heard is that you have a lot more control over your own fire risk than you might know, and that's through FireSmart. And that emergencies are going to happen, whether it's a fire or something else. And if you haven't thought about them beforehand, it's going to be a lot harder for you. So please do have a plan, think about what you might be doing, and get equipment, get a kit where you need to make sure that you have everything you need that you would need during an emergency, so that when it does happen. So those are the three things we want to leave you with today. Before you leave, I do want to ask one big question. How do you feel about what you heard today? Do you feel more prepared for wildfire community because of this session? And then there's a second part of this poll. Did you hear something today that you can actually take action on, something that you can do, something that you will do because of what you heard? You can be honest. I'll leave that out there for 5 more seconds, so you're on the clock. And I will share the results with you. So very positive. Thank you very much. It sounds like most people feel more prepared, whether it's yes or somewhat, more yes than somewhat. And then the same on will you take action? 94% of you said yes, there is something that you could take action on, and a few no's and don't knows. So with that, thank you very much for attending. For the speakers, if you could just turn on your camera. And I want to thank you very much for sharing with all of us today. It's really a pleasure for me to work with folks of your caliber. Yeah, the link will be in the recording or your inbox within a week here. And so we want to say goodbye. Thank you for joining us. I know this is your own time and you chose to spend it with us. We don't take that lightly. But wait, there's more. All of the things we talked about today can be found on our website. It's not a great website, but it has some really good stuff on it. And so you can find our URL right at the bottom there, but actually much easier is if you just type SGI emergency into the search bar. It might not be your top result, but it's definitely in your top 3. And you're going to find 100 pages plus of your wildfire resiliency plan. It goes into more detail than we could ever touch in a format like this. If you don't want to read 100 pages, we've also boiled it down into a 3-page summary. That's the one I recommend. You're going to find your household evacuation guides, for each one of your community. And then there's another place where you can sign up for that public alert notification system. Please do that so that we can tell you about emergencies when they're happening. You don't have to hear about them from a neighbor too late. Thank you very much for joining us. Goodbye.